This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Michael Sipiora, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast once again.
My pleasure to be here.
I was saying before we started recording that it's very timely as we record this on March 6th, 2026. The US is fomenting a potential World War III, and AI companies are being shown to have involvement in the war and giving lots of money to the Trump administration and all this. And I know for myself and my clients and friends, a lot of us are feeling like really kind of confused, helpless, a lot of anxiety. The doomsday clock was just moved ahead to 85 seconds to midnight, which is the closest it's ever been since it was started in, I think, 1947. So these are dire times. And, I'm always thinking like, well, what's a response that I could offer on this platform? And I really believe that a depth psychological perspective can help us as individuals to not get completely overwhelmed by fear, helplessness, outrage, and maybe preserve some kind of freedom in order to take some action, even on a small local level in response to what's happening in the world. So it's good timing, and I'm glad to have you back to speak mainly about your book, Psychological Citizenship and Democracy, which addresses all of this stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And as in our previous discussions, the reason that I chose to write it now was that I think Hillman really has something that is worth listening to with regard to what we can do. And that, all the guardrails have fallen away. The courts have given way, our media has given way, our businesses have given way, especially AI. All the traditional safeguards for the American democracy have pretty much acquiesced to the Trump administration. And I think it's important that we see the Trump administration. I mean that by not only the president, but his cabinet, the 2025 manifesto that they're following, all these things as a piece, as symptoms of the end of the American empire. They brought about by neoliberalism and ultimately having to do with what Hillman calls an economic unconscious. That the way we make sense of everything is in terms of profit, loss, everything becomes transactional. And of course, Trump as president is the epitome of this. He's a real estate guy. It's always the art of the deal. That means there's no sense making that's other than the transactional. And that has, proven deadly for us. And that's what he's doing now. He's constantly making deals. And of course, they don't work out very well, as his business career demonstrates. But, where was he most successful? As a TV star, with outrage, firing people. There was that kind of enthusiasm that people liked. Finally, there was something that was decisive, but it's decisive in all the wrong ways. I think Bernie Sanders is right when he says Trump definitely identified the problems, but all of his solutions are the wrong ones.
Mm-hmm.
So where are we left? We're left with the demos, the people, the citizens, we the people. And in a democracy, the people's power is through being citizens. And that's what really the book is ultimately about. How do we become better citizens, or what Hillman calls psychological citizens? And what's significant here is that citizenship really is dependent upon a sense of the common good. Unfortunately, the dominant kind of self that we are in the West today is this highly individualistic, atomistic, self-contained kind of individual, which is, as we've talked about, this is a definitely an anomaly when we look across, different cultures and even Western history. But this kind of self makes the common good into a compromise. I give a little, you give a little, and that compromise never really works out. The alternative, and this is the kind of self that people have been most often in history, and there's many, many varieties of it, but a kind of relational self, where one understands oneself in one's relatedness to others, to the world itself, that we're a field of relations. And that kind of self, the common good can be fulfilling. It can be something that we desire because our humanity is connected with the humanity of others and the well being of the world as a whole. So, this is the important shift in being a different kind of self than we are today, I think, is the critical psychological moment that we need to pursue. And this is something I get from Sheldon Wolin and other people, that to be a Democrat is really to change oneself instead of self interest, communal interest. And this is where Hillman comes in. Now, in order to really grasp this, I think we have to realize there's not this thing like human nature that's been, universal, timeless, that human beings are always individuals, but there's different ways of being individuals. There's different varieties of it, different kinds of individuals. And this self-contained individual that we have, and the car is a great example of this, and the things in our world reflect back who we are to be. So thinking about the car, there's firm self-other boundaries. It's my, outside my car is not me, inside's me. So everything that's important becomes me. It's an internal locus of control. This exclusionary internal locus of control is competitive, my place in traffic. And so we're all set as competitors against one another for our own, I want to get there quicker. That's really a very dangerous kind of self that we have. And of course, the car has given rise to tremendous ecological problems, and we didn't have to go that way. We really didn't. I remember my dad telling me when he was growing up as a kid in Chicago, you could take electric streetcars anywhere in the city. Nobody had cars. But that all got changed because of financial interest. Again, that economic unconscious. That's the reason we make our decisions, economic benefit or economic loss. When you look on the other side, that relational kind of self, that kind of self, which we have in many, in your country, in First Peoples and Native peoples all over the world, there's a sense of belonging to a larger whole and being connected. And so that something that's detrimental to one part of our world is detrimental to us. And so this is where we come into why I think Hillman's notion of the psychological citizen that comes out of understanding therapy as a cell of revolution is important.
Mhm. Yeah. So for Hillman, the therapy room could be a place where we start to bring in some of these ideas about the collective self, the relational self, um, identifying the common good, like the higher values that we all feel are most important beyond the economic.
Right. Um, when you think about it, psychology does not have power in the world. We can't change the material or the economic structure of the world, and those things need to shift. I mean, the control by the oligarchy, the 1%, that's got to be challenged. But that's not what psychology can do. But psychology is the one who helps us understand what it is to be a human being, what kind of self to be. And in the course of therapy, one has the opportunity to help people see their connectedness to others and to the world and to value it. And when you are that kind of relational self, it's an erotic connection. There's eros there because it's part of me. But my connections with others are not transactional profit loss. They're connections that are out of love. And love as eros as connection. I'm not talking about just affection. I like this or I like that, but they're deeply part of who I am. And when that kind of understanding is inculcated in therapy, there's a shift then towards being more relational. And this is what I think Hillman is trying to get at when he talks about the self as the interiorization of community that's informed by what Alfred Adler called uh, social interest. And that social interest is really, it's an innate capacity to care about the larger good. It's informed by the perfection of humanity, always a goal never to be achieved, but always something that you're moving towards. Um, it's as Randy Severson, who's written about this, talks about, it's a rhetorical trope. It's a way of thinking about and being a human being, engaging, that works towards higher values, things of greater importance. That's the realm that Hillman calls the archetypal. And as we go forward, I think one of the things that's important to appreciate about Hillman is he uses archetypal as an adjective. He's not talking about archetypes as things in themselves, but there's certain kinds of meaning which have deep resonance, importance regarding what it is to be a human being. That's the archetypal realm, the extraordinary dimensions of our experience in which we really find our humanity. So this cultivation of a relational self that's directed towards that dimension of our experience is something that can be done in psychotherapy. It's where psychology can contribute, not only in psychotherapy, but also, I think, in the public domain. One of the things that I valued about Hillman, he was a public intellectual. He spoke to the general public. He wrote things that were accessible to a lot of people. Um, and that's another important role that psychology can play. But again, the focus is going to be on how do we understand what it means to be a human being? And ultimately, that's a political question. Because if the self is how we understand the individual within a particular cultural historical context, our powers, our prohibitions, inclusive of our moral understandings, that's what's decided in the polis. And by the polis, we don't mean political in a narrow sense, but the polis says the human context. When Aristotle says that, and Hillman loves to quote this, that we're by nature political, he means that the foundation for our taking up our humanity is in the communal context, the way things have been decided, and over time regarding how we can best be a human being. And we have a faulty understanding of that in the world today, with this transactional view, this economic unconscious, this heroic ego, self-containment. It pits us all one against another in a way that is profoundly destructive of people and planet.
Mm-hmm.
So cultivating this relational kind of self where we're erotically connected to the world. There's an engagement. Things matter to us. And that's the first moment, I think, in like 4 parts of Hillman's notion of uh, therapy as a cell of revolution. And again, this is what we can do. We can be more relational. We can engage with people more. We can see ourselves as our connectedness. And then evaluating this, our responses when you're connected and you're up, there's a qualitative connection instead of the quantitative transactional view that we have today. We have a different kind of engagement. That's what Hillman calls the aesthetic response. And it's qualitative instead of quantitative. It's value oriented instead of transactional. It is moral instead of economic. And in this kind of engagement, we can evaluate things because he always says that this appreciation of the presence of things, their what kindedness as we engage with them, always has an inherent judgment. We're drawn towards beauty, we're repelled by ugliness. We're motivated to protest injustice, and we admire justice. And along with that, in this kind of engagement, there's an involvement. And that's what Hillman means by destiny. That's how we're called to be within this context, which we're calling the political.
Hmm.
Hillman says at one point, I think it's quite true that both the formal cause and the final cause of human beings are political. He's moving off to Aristotle's notion of 4 causes. By the formal cause, what kind of being is the human being? Well, we're an engaged being, a relational kind of being, a being whose possibilities and prohibitions. All of these are configured within a particular context. And the telos is to fulfill ourselves as that kind of being, seeking justice, apprising beauty, and being engaged. So when we say that we're by nature political, we don't mean that in the sense of partisan politics. We mean that in the sense really of cosmological involvement.
Mm-hmm.
So then the another part of this is that in therapy, we can help people what I call run their symptoms to ground in the world. Look at the distress that we hear about in the consulting room. People are afraid of downward mobility. They're really questioning whether or not our government is working in their best interest. They're concerned about the economic reality. They're concerned about what things are going to be like for their kids and their grandkids. All of these concerns, which provoke a great amount of anxiety, depressions, a lot of the maladies that come in the consulting room, that's the speaking of the body politic, of its symptoms, and helping people follow their individual symptoms to that deeper ground in the state of the world sets us up to engage. And that engagement following the aesthetic responses is again to protest against ugliness, to protest against injustice, to protest against senselessness. And for Hillman, that's the citizen's job, is to do that protest. And that that protest can be an empty protest, as he calls it. We don't have to have the solution to say, no, that's not right, or no, that's ugly. We don't have to, but we need to. And that's where he talks about the reawakening and the refining of the aesthetic response. Now, Hillman was writing a lot of this, it was before Trump. And he was writing about this when there was still, I think people have awakened. I think that the MAGA movement, the populism on both the left and the right, is an awakening of people to what's wrong in our society. So it's not just about the awakening, that's beginning to happen. Not that he calls it an anesthetized numbness, isn't still there in large parts of our population, but there are a lot of people waking up. But then there's the refinement of this aesthetic sensibility. And this is where a polytheistic cosmological approach that he offers is really important. So unpacking that's important because his polytheism does not take the gods literally. Again, he's always talking about adjectives. And when he talks about cosmological, he doesn't mean a rarefied thing, a cosmos. He says to fall prey to that is to fall prey to a metaphysical paranoia. It's a description, cosmological refers to that things are contextually related. They form a context, and that interconnectedness is what we need to see. The polytheistic is multi-perspectivalism. There is no one set way. We have to move out of the monotheism, whether we're talking about psychological monotheism or political monotheism, to recognize there is no ultimate that we can know. Instead, we have different perspectives. And politics is where these perspectives need to come into civil dialogue, where values need to be decided through genuine conversation, through dialogue, with reasoned debate for these things. We're connected erotically, but then we need to articulate the reasons that come out of that connectedness, why this is ugly, why this is unjust. And that's the debate that we should be having in the political realm. So again, now the terms of the discourse are qualitative. What kind of a thing are we talking about? Not cost-benefit analysis, not transactional ways of looking at things. So this leading us to what Hillman talks about as the psychological citizen.
And Can we pause there for a second?
Sure, please.
I want to get down to ground level.
Yeah.
So in the therapy room, I think one of the ways that archetypal psychology can help people have that multi-perspectival perspective on the world begins within the self. And that's one of the things that archetypal psychology can help with, I think, because like he said, he thought of it as the archetypal denoting value, purpose, meaning, importance. And there's like for him and for me, an attitude of like equality of value. Like it all belongs, everything is significant, everything is important, all these symptoms that arise. So like let's really take them seriously and try to uncover their value, their purpose, their meaning. Would you
Right.
say that's accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And then if we can start to imagine ourselves that way as this, the self as an interiorization of a community of archetypal forces, archetypal patterns, and that they all have value, then we can take that perspective out into the world and see other people as expressions of this polytheistic cosmos, many voices, many perspectives, something like that. Like I just want to make that move from how we can start that kind of education process or the refinement in the therapy room.
Let's go back to, we'll go back to that in just a second, but take that a step further. So you're out in the world and you recognize that there's no one truth, period.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, human beings do not possess that. It's not in our power. So there are multiple perspectives, but the perspectives that one has, um, they they are informed by this affective attachment. They're not just up in the head. They mean something. These values matter. So that's when there are moments when these diverse voices can come together and through collective dialogue come to decisions that are informed by the common good. There's different senses of the common good, but sometimes we can come together and make decisions that do further what we all can agree is the common good. That's what we want. That's what Sheldon Wolin calls fugitive democracy. That democracy, he says, and this is a guy, a major political theorist who's looked at the history of Western political thought. And he says we should conceive of democracy not as a form of government, but those moments, those fugitive episodic moments when people from diverse perspectives respect each other enough to engage in dialogue and come to a consensus and then act on that. Those moments are the moments that we want to cultivate. We're not going to turn things over completely. You know, Hillman always says you start where you're at, and where we're at is there's such forces aligned against the common good. We're never going to turn it over completely. We're not going to be in power, but we can come together in these moments and exercise enough power to scare the people who are making the decisions into compromises, to hold them back, to change direction somewhat. That's where we want to go. That's what is the ultimate telos of what we're working on in the therapy room from this perspective. Now, of course, the very slow and deep work of analytical psychology is incredibly important. And this is not about replacing it with a different kind of therapy, but informing it with this political telos, understood in the way we've been talking about it. So you get people, and we've talked about this. One of the things I think that's so important is when people, and they come into my consulting room all the time, they're upset by the orange guy, is what they call him. They didn't even want to say his name.
Mm-hmm.
And they're upset, they're just going crazy about this stuff. I said, yeah, of course you are. Who wouldn't be? This is not something wrong with you that you're anxious and depressed and you've got to get a handle on it and push it down. No, you should be. But then look around. What can you do? And one of the things that I do all the time is I refer people to a little book by Timothy Snyder called On Tyranny. And it's 20 lessons from the 20th century. This guy, he's a Yale historian, very well versed in, totalitarian regimes. And he talks about these 10 things that we can do. So I affirm people's anxiety and depression, but I say, think about this, and there are things like very simple things. Talk to people that you don't know. Look them in the eye. Recognize their humanity. Don't flood yourself with all the headlines. Instead, read 2 articles, longer articles by reputable reporters every week to get more depthful understanding. Don't say our institutions if you aren't actively involved in supporting an institution. And that can be anything from your local library to working for a congressional representative. Pay attention to what's going on in your local community. How can you be involved? How can you be engaged to make things better? And in all of these activities, talk to other people. I mean, at the local level, we should be able to more easily find common ground because we care about the same things. We care about our city or our town. We care about our kids. We care about their education. Those are the places where you start to build consensus. I mean, that's why the Republicans have worked on taking over school boards for the last 20 years, because that's where they make inroads. That's where people who have these alternative ideas need also to be involved. Another thing I have people do is, because, okay, the citizen's job is to protest. But as Naomi Klein said during the first administration, title of one of her books, no is not enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We need imagination to build constructive visions for the future. We need charismatic leadership, and the charisma not from personality, but from the vision that the person is presenting. And one of the people who has been one of the most outstanding citizens of the 20th century, I think, is Ralph Nader. And he recently wrote a book called Citizen Self-Respect. And he lays out all the things that we should be outraged at. Like the American defense budget has not been audited for decades, even though Congress has demanded it. And we know the cost overruns. We know how much money is being spent there, or excessive money. And those are the things we should be outraged about. But then he goes through and says, if you're a worker, here's what you can do. As a citizen, this is what you can do. As a parent, this is what you can do. And he lays out actions, concrete actions that we can take, and resources that we can turn to engage in those constructive, to turn protest into constructive activity. Mm-hmm. So going back to the consulting realm, we help people see that a great deal of the ground of their distress is a disordered world. And that, yes, you have to work through the personal always, but you got to not stop there. You got to go further and address the ground. And if you're cultivating a more relational kind of self in therapy, and by that, I don't mean indoctrination. You can never foist your politics on someone else. That would be absolutely unethical. You can never try and indoctrinate people. But I think that we are naturally relational beings, that you help people see who they are in their relationships and then start to appraise that with their own good sense. What kind of relationship is this? How does it matter? What kind of human being does this make me into? Am I someone of whom I can be proud? What are my obligations to myself, to others, to the planet? Mm-hmm. And then a piece of this that Hillman does mention that I think is really important is that we need to feel grief over ecological destruction. And if we're not feeling that grief, we're not facing the reality. And if we don't face the reality, we can't engage to change it. Now, unfortunately, we've pathologized grief. I mean, in the new DSM, if you've lost someone or lost anything and you're grieving for over a certain amount of time, it's now a disorder. That's such a travesty. Everyone in our culture today should be experiencing a certain amount of grief over what is happening to the ecological world today. And that grief doesn't have to be paralyzing. In fact, that grief is the prerequisite for constructive action. Mm-hmm. Without it, we haven't faced the reality. Grief is the natural human response to loss.
Yeah.
And when we're losing the polar ice caps, we should be grieving.
Yeah. And we could apply the same thing to the what's going on in the Middle East with ICE in America and all of it. And it's a great example of the kind of archetypal psychological motto of following the symptom. So
Right.
if I follow grief down to the ground, like you were saying, what I'm going to find there is a love for other humans, a love for the natural world. And out of that love, I can start to take some action, some positive action in the world.
Exactly. You don't grieve over things you don't love.
Yeah.
I mean, Hillman says that ultimately what's going to save us from the ecological disaster that we're facing has to be love of the world, love of the earth.
Hmm. And to get back to that love, which I think is part of what makes us human, we have to kind of do the work of de-anesthetizing ourselves and not just reawakening our aesthetic sense, but giving it value and importance
Yeah,
and trusting it as a valid kind of innate moral response that the soul has to ugliness, injustice, abuse of power, all of that, right? And I think that's a big part of it because in today's day and age, I mean, all of our attention is being drawn outwards into the screens, and we're not often paying attention to that aesthetic response because, man, there's so much ugliness on the screens. Whether it's AI generated ads or kind of polemic commentators railing against, the others and all of that. And so I think that's part of what we can do in therapy as well, is helping to turn people toward that aesthetic response. And as therapists, uh, valuing that person's aesthetic response and kind of raising it up into their awareness and saying, no, this is like really important. This response you're having to things, and like let's show it some value.
absolutely. And a couple of things here is helping people recognize the deeper context of their aesthetic response. And that's, I think, the refinement of the aesthetic response is understanding it within context. A great example that Wolfgang Gigerich gives, I think, in The Soul Always Thinks, is the automobile, which I mentioned earlier, that the epitome of self-contained individualism. You see a really nice car. Let's say you like a Corvette. It's well crafted, it's dependable, it's sleek, it's beautiful, right? But that beauty is only skin deep. Go deeper. What about the materials? What about the rubber? What about the gas? What about the pollution? What about all the world that is gathered by that thing in its larger context? That's where we need to go. That's the complex aesthetic response that we need to cultivate. The
Right.
naive one puts us there, puts us in contact in a way that's not in terms of cost benefit, but we need to go deeper. And that's where an education in the humanities is very helpful, but it's also where our experience is so helpful. If we learn from our experience, if we pay attention to it. And that gets me to what you just said. All the screens take us away from our experience, they supplant our experience. I mean, way back in the 70s, Jerry Mander wrote a book, Four Arguments for the Elimination of TV. But the essential part of it was we give more validity to what we see on the screen than our own experience. And what we see on the screen is filled with distortions, with hidden agendas, all of it meant to take us away from our experience, to supplant our experience. And so resisting that is really important,
Hmm. Yeah, I
especially
just want to pause and go back to where you're saying to go deeper into the aesthetic response. I think that's really great, and I just want to kind of draw that out to show how that could work on us and change our valuing and then our action. So we've got the Corvette. We think, wow, that's a really sexy thing. If I'm able to afford that, it kind of shows my status. I've really made it if I've got this car, and maybe
yeah,
it'll attract the right woman or whatever is kind of wrapped up in that initial aesthetic response.
if you
But if
use the
we,
right toothpaste, you're going to be sexy and you're going to get laid more often.
yeah,
Yeah,
but I don't know if the toothpaste will do that, but maybe the veneers that you can buy or something now.
yeah,
But anyway, so if we kind of stick with it and we kind of go past that kind of initial superficial response to let's stick with the Corvette, and we get into, wow, what are the implications of me buying this new Corvette off the lot? Well, I've just done away with my old car, scrapped it before it's completely run its course. All of the kind of technology, where does the lithium battery come from, and all that kind of stuff, right? Where does the steel come from? Oh, now it comes from China, and the new Corvettes aren't the same quality as they used to be when they were made in Detroit, and all of that. Maybe at the bottom of that, it shifts my values, and I can see my old car that is still running just fine, the old Toyota Corolla or whatever. We can start to see that as something of value. And I think, like, something that's happened for me with my old Honda that has been like so reliable for over a decade, and it like sips gas. So when I see the gas prices go up, I go, it doesn't really affect me so much. I fill up about once a month. Um, is that something in that valuing of this vehicle, this object, I think imparts a kind of soul quality on the vehicle. And so now I feel this like really kind of special appreciation for this car, and I want to take care of it now that I value it, some regular maintenance and cleaning and all of that stuff. And so it changes my action in the world. It changes how I relate to this vehicle. It's no longer just a car, to be swapped out every year. It's like a member of the family.
Right. And it's not that you're doing that for solely economic reasons. It is more economical for you to keep your Honda.
Hmm.
Not the reason you're doing it. You're doing it because of other values. And that's the thing. It's about how we value things, how we value well-made things, things that take into account the larger context.
Hmm.
And Heidegger says that, things gather world. What world does the Corvette gather? What are the cosmos that is set up? And that's about the cosmological evaluation of things. What's implied? What's the larger context? What's the weave of relatedness that this particular thing is part of or configures? And how do we value that? That's the deeper view. And for that, we need qualitative as opposed to quantitative sense making.
Hmm.
We and when we're talking about love, we're not talking about sentimentality at all. We're
Hmm.
talking about eros, and eros is about connection.
Hmm.
And if we are this relational, see, this is where all this is contingent, is keyed on shifting how we understand ourselves, what kind of self to be. And if we can do that in therapy, we've made a contribution. It's not the solution, but it's what therapy and psychology, I think, can contribute to enhancing our citizenship, with citizenship being the last stand we have against tyranny.
Hmm. Yeah. And moving the therapy room, which is, I think for the most part, in this day and age, we could say it's a cell of individuation. It's about personal empowerment, sovereignty. I hear these words all of the time. Kind of personal resilience,
Exactly.
not collective resilience and all of that, like self-help instead of mutual aid, right? So we transform it from that, which we know what that's doing to people, and we know what it's doing to the world. We turn it from that into this place where we kind of ferment the notion of a communal self. And we can do that through many examples, like what you're kind of offering here, is just kind of pointing out, like making those links, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. And, let's be clear. People go into psychology because they care about other people. And it's not bad people that are presenting this view of psychology. It's bad ideas. And
Mm,
psychology, unfortunately, as I say all the time, has been a handmaiden of oppression. It's continued to reinforce a deformative status quo by saying adjust, adapt, cope better, become a better self contained individual, a stronger ego. And that's what has been very, very destructive. And people, I mean, the psychologist has the desire to help people, but what they've done is created more social harm. Now, that breakdown of the world that people are experiencing is one that is difficult to hold. I mean, I think it's a very difficult time to be a
Mhm.
person today, to have this grief over what's going on, this outrage about a war of choice where so many people are being killed, outrage at the disintegration of our institutions and the utter disarray that's happening in the world today. That's a tough thing to hold. So we have to help people hold that, give them a place to talk about. Many of my clients now, sometimes we spend the whole session talking about the world. And why? Because they don't feel they have anywhere else to talk about it.
Mhm.
Of course,
Yeah.
we deal with their individual issues. It's not just only that, but they need a place. So giving people a place to feel these things, to express these things, and then suggestions about, here's how you could educate yourself more. At the same time, you're really validating their feelings. Yeah, who would not be upset when you look at the world today? And if you're not upset, what kind of person are you?
Mhm.
To be happy in today's world all the time, it's a form of insanity, of losing
Yeah.
your mind if you're happy all the time.
You're not connected to reality if you're
Hey,
happy all
it's
the
all
time.
for the good, man. It's all good. But
Mm.
no, it's not all good. A lot of it's really bad. Let's
Mhm.
fix that. Let's experience that. And then let's engage in constructive ways.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that,
I mean, this is like, I do men's work with men individually and with groups, and this is part of being an adult, is being able to deal with reality. And yeah, because part of that denial, there's something about that I think keeps people in a more kind of adolescent state, which brings about, feelings of like helplessness or like apathy or nihilism. It's like, oh, whatever, it's just gonna, things are gonna go the way they're gonna go. And I think this is like wrapped up too with Hillman's critique of therapy in that it really kind of centers on the wounded child and how the wounded child is by its nature apolitical or depoliticized or politically powerless, not interested. Um, I wonder if you could like say more about that.
sure. And Hillman talks about definitely that child archetype. And he says it goes along with the American belief in innocence. We're a young country. We have this kind of innocence. And he says, what defines the American character is belief, believing in belief. And those beliefs, which are usually literalistic, monotheistic, are ones, and I don't mean religiously, I mean this is the only way it can be looked at, are forms of denial. And with that denial, we don't really pay attention to what's going on in the world today. And then when things get disrupted, it's individual trauma. I mean, everything is traumatic now. Now, obviously, there is real trauma, but we underestimate people's capacity to bear suffering. I would say more than if there's one single thing that runs through all the therapy work I've ever done over 30, 40 years, is helping people have confidence in their ability to bear suffering. We're robbed of that by our culture because there's a smiley face everywhere. There's all these escapes. So we never want to be unhappy. But suffering is an appropriate response to injustice, to ugliness, to senselessness. We have to undergo it. But in undergoing it, we do not submit to it. Instead, we engage it. We try and understand it more. We respond to it.
Mhm.
That's important that we do. And that's like suffering the grief of ecological disaster. People don't want to think about it. I don't want to be bummed out all the time. Well, you don't have to be bummed out all the time, but you have to hold this grief and deepen it into a response. Okay, I've acknowledged it. I'm no longer in denial, so I'm grieving. But there, I've opened up the possibility of engaging differently. thinking about ecological choices in everything that we do. And then going further through educating yourself, like, okay, I'm really ecologically, invested because I recycle. I put stuff in the different barrels, but then go deeper, do some research. We find out that that doesn't do anything. That the petrochemical company have labeled all kinds of plastics as recyclable, when in reality they are not. So then you don't pacify yourself with token things. That's what we've been programmed to do. You go deeper and you think about, well, I'm not going to use plastic anymore. And you work really hard not to use plastic. Now, that's in a way not easy because plastic is everywhere, but it's an action that you can take along with other actions that are informed by this erotic engagement with the world, that things matter. What happens to the planet matters for me, and the people who go after me.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and I've mentioned before, my late friend Phil Cushman, and I really agree with this, said there are three things that people find fulfilling, that fulfills the human life. A sense of community. And that's what we're talking about with the communal kind of self. A sense of shared values. That's what happens when we have those fugitive moments of democracy. And a sense of tradition, which is a connection with those who have gone before us and those who will come after us. That is a perspective that we can cultivate in therapy.
Mm.
Not in a heavy-handed way, but pointing out, like you said a moment ago, people have this response. Don't brush it away. Don't run away from it. Let's stay with that. Let's explore it. Let's give it space. That's what we can do in therapy.
To watch or listen to the full episode, become a free or paid member by visiting patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness, or by downloading the Patreon app to your mobile device. Paid memberships start at just $5 a month and offer a number of benefits, including early access to all episodes, the full podcast archives, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting an independent creator directly. Thanks.